Okay, this is not a pleasant topic to have to make a video about, and I'm not gonna bother scripting this or anything, because I think it's just worth giving it a quick discussion or something, just off the chest, because in case you somehow managed to find this video without being updated on this news, Ross of Accursed Farms just put out a new update video about his Stop Killing Games initiative. And unfortunately, with only 1 month left on the European Citizens Initiative petition, and it being at under 50% of the signatures needed in order to actually force it to be put up against the, EU government for, consideration, it looks like it's going to fall through, and that is a huge blow to this whole, initiative as a whole. Now, he does thankfully talk about some other avenues that he's going to be pursuing. He's got like half a dozen or so other things that he's attempting in order to try and get this, out there and hopefully get some kind of legislation passed. And I will put a link in the description so that you can obviously check out the original video that he made and the EU petition and all that other stuff. Go over to his channel, watch it. He goes way more in depth about it than I ever possibly could. And I just want to say, like, obviously, it is so important that I think we support the Stop Destroying Video Games, Stop Killing Games initiative. Because, like, it's such a annoying thing, right? That these companies can just decide that you can't play a thing that you bought anymore. It's so nonsensical and just straight up bullshit, really. I'm not gonna monetize this video. What am I talking about, And it's so frustrating, especially because it's very clear to me that, like, when he first started this initiative last year, it had a lot of momentum going up with it, and there were a lot of signatures coming in. And then Pirate Software, aka Thor, made a video basically just dunking on the entire thing. And, obviously it's impossible to know what would have happened had he not intervened, but he, as one of the biggest influencers to actually make a video on it, especially not long after it started, he really dealt a huge blow with his videos trying to take it down. And the worst thing is that he didn't even make a single good argument talking about why he hated the initiative so much. Like, the main problem was just that he was completely and utterly misinformed about what the initiative is even about. And yet he still insisted on making these videos complaining about things that aren't even part of the initiative. And then, like, he would essentially, the pattern of his arguments were that he would make an assumption about what the initiative was without having fully read it or understood it for himself. And then when he did actually go and read through it, he couldn't find any text that supported his assumption. Thus, he basically just assumed that the text must be wrong, because of course he can't be wrong. And then, based on that, he just criticized it even more for being too vague and non-specific, because it wasn't lining up with what he assumed it was about, which he also didn't like to be. It's such, like, I made a video like a year ago more directly responding to some of his arguments, and, like, every single one of his arguments are just so terrible. But because he framed the initiative in this way, and he had such a huge audience, far bigger than Ross's, that meant that so many people were grossly misinformed. Like, the biggest thing that Ross is annoyed about whenever people, like, point out a common criticism with this whole initiative is that so many people seem to be under the impression that the Stop Killing Games initiative unrealistically wants developers to keep supporting games completely indefinitely. You know, like if you release a live service game, you have to support it in perpetuity. Like even if your company goes under, you need to somehow find a way to have somebody keeping those servers online and keeping multiplayer active and yada yada yada. And like obviously no, that's not at all what the initiative is about, in the slightest. Like, in case, again, you somehow are watching this video without having heard about it, basically the core premise of Stop Killing Games is that it is about game preservation. You know, games are an art form, just like any other art form out there. Paintings, movies, TV shows, anything like that. All forms of art deserve to be preserved for future generations to be able to experience it for themselves. That's why we have museums that contain works of art from thousands of years ago, you know, so that we can learn about those cultures and preserve them and keep that knowledge. Hell, a lot of what we know about ancient cultures only exists because that artwork has been preserved for so long. And like, yeah, am I saying that, you know, Call of Duty is some kind of, you know, cultural like landstone that's gonna, you know, define our culture for future generations? Like, no, but like, of course video games still deserve to be preserved, and this idea that companies can just shut them down and decide that nobody is allowed to enjoy this game at all anymore simply because it's not profitable is just, it's so bad for consumers, you know? And like, that's really the core crux of it, because it's not even really about video games when you really think about it. It's about consumer rights. You know, the core premise, as Ross talks about in his video, is that, you know, when you buy something, you should be able to own that thing for as long as you can maintain it for yourself. You know, if you buy a truck from 1950 or whatever, right? If you're able to keep repairing that truck and keep it going and keep filling it with gas or whatever, you can drive that truck for as long as you want. You know, like, there's whole people who collect, you know, classic cars and products like that and maintain them for decades, if not centuries, practically, you know? So like, if you are purchasing a game, then you should be able to keep that game for as long as you can. And then that's the thing, the core mix-up here is that so many games these days are being sold as a service, you know, like an MMO, for example. But they're still, the way you purchase them is purchased like a good. And that's the core difference, is the difference between a good and a service. You know, so like I said, buying a car is purchasing a good, but a service is something like, you know, purchasing a massage. And when you purchase a massage, you know, you are putting down money, and there is a contract, you know, verbal or otherwise, where it is understood that you are purchasing a like 1 hour long massage. There's no confusion about, you know, when is the massage going to end. It's not going to just start and then end 2 minutes in or whatever. Like, there is a specific time that this service is going to last, that the consumer is made clearly aware of, and then when it ends, you know, ideally it feels like the consumer has gotten their money's worth. And like, it's not like we're saying that we need to preserve the massage for all time, you know? So like, similarly, if a game is going to be sold as a service, then it should be advertised as a service. You know, if the goal of a game is that it's not going to be able to be kept forever, then at the very least, it should say like, okay, this game is going to be shut down in 10 years or whatever, right? And so that way, at least by declaring that at the start, it makes it so that the consumer is aware, like, okay, if I purchase this game, then it will be available for 10 years. And then after that period of time, it will no longer exist. And at least I can make an informed purchase based on that information. But obviously companies don't like the idea of doing that, because if you're 8 years in on this 10-year lifespan game, well, nobody's going to purchase the game anymore. You know, even if you have in-game microtransactions and a die-hard player base, who's going to buy microtransactions for a game that's going to be shut down in 2 years? Like, obviously nobody would do that. And so that's why companies don't do this in the first place. And to be fair, there are ways that I think that this could work out for everyone. Like, for example, the classic MMO subscription model does technically fit within the guidelines of this initiative, you know, because a MMO with a subscription, and I'm not a huge fan of MMOs with subscriptions, but, you know, for the sake of argument, at the very least, an MMO with a subscription, it has very clearly defined terms where if you pay for a month subscription, then you get to experience this game for that month. You know, the game is being advertised as a clear service, and there are clear start and end dates to the terms of that service agreement. So, you know, that at least, you know, falls within the purview. So, like, when people are complaining, like, oh, that means they're going to have to keep World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV online forever, like, those games are already exempt from this initiative. So, like, they're completely irrelevant from this discussion to begin with, and it just kind of goes to show just how much damage people like Thor, and I mean Thor especially, did by misinforming people so much on this initiative. Because, like back when I first made that video debunking a lot of Thor's arguments, I'll admit I did not know much about him. I basically only heard about him through a handful of shorts maybe, and of course his stance on the Stop Killing Games thing. And so I kind of gave him the benefit of the doubt. You know, I was being nice. He seemed like an informed developer who had a lot of experience in the industry, and he seemed to speak with a lot of confidence about what he said. If I made another video like that today, and I'm not, but if I did, I would be a lot less respectful of him. I think it has become increasingly obvious as time has gone on that Thor is incredibly egotistical and refuses to ever admit fault. Like, he basically, like I said, the core problem with his stance on this is that he just refused to actually acknowledge what the initiative was even about. And then he just based it entirely on his own assumptions and then strawmanned the entire initiative to something that it has nothing to do with, and then made arguments against that, you know? And that's just incredibly rude and irresponsible. And then, of course, even more cowardly was the fact that he refused to talk to Ross about it, and then insulted him for having the gall to be like, hey, I think you got a few things wrong. Maybe you have some misunderstandings. If you want to chat about it, I can clear up some misconceptions. That is an incredibly nice thing for Ross to offer. And it's not even like he's saying, like, oh, I need to debate you. I want to cause drama or anything. Like, no. Ross approached this incredibly maturely and was like, hey, you know, I'm trying to get this thing done. I understand you have some opposition. And, like, that's the thing. Even if he's opposed to the concept of, you know, video game preservation, which is a wild thing to be opposed to, but he does appear to be opposed to that, it would still be prudent to acknowledge Ross and have a dialogue with him, because why would you not? Right? Like, if you are for video game preservation, but you think the initiative is written poorly or worded poorly, or maybe it'll harm developers in some way because you think parts of it are unrealistic, well, then talking to Ross about it can help him modify and change things a little bit so that it can be better worded and better phrased so that we end up with a better system in the first place. And if you really are against it that much, then talk to Ross and try to convince him to not do it, or maybe go for a more specific thing that you can agree with. You know, like, it's a win-win scenario no matter how you look at it. Like, the worst case scenario is that nobody changes their opinion and then you're just back to square one. But, like, at the very least you had a dialogue and people may have come away more informed from it. So, like, there is no scenario where talking to Ross and having this, you know, dialogue back and forth between Thor and Ross to talk about, you know, arguments for and against the Stop Killing Games initiative, like, it's nothing but good things. And yet Thor made up excuses, he insulted Ross, and he ran away from having a fair and honest dialogue about it, probably because he's afraid of having his mind changed. Like, Thor is a bad person. Like that's all there is to it. He does not deserve the audience that he's gotten. He speaks with way too much confidence about things he actually does not know that much about, and it's only become increasingly obvious as a number of controversies have happened over the last year or so that Thor is just kind of narcissistic and a bit of an asshole. Like he has garnered and built up this fan base on exaggerations at best and just speaking confidently in a deep voice. But like I said, this video is not meant to just be a takedown of Thor. The point is that Stop Killing Games is an important initiative, and I think that it's important that even if this fails, I think it's important that more people become aware of this because, like I said, it's about consumer rights. It's about protecting your rights and putting in common sense legislation to try and stop companies from getting away with even more bullshit than they're already getting away with these days. You know, because if we do nothing, then the only thing that's going to happen is it's going to get worse. You know, like, because we're already at a point where companies can just put in their terms of service that they have the right to revoke your license at any time, you know, despite paying real money and potentially an ongoing amount of money with like subscriptions and whatnot. Like the idea that a company could just pull the plug with zero notice and that's completely within their terms and rights to do so. We shouldn't just stand by and let that happen. And the longer that we do nothing about it, the more that companies are going to try and get away with it. Because like that's the thing is that what has happened is effectively there is no legislation in place that governs this kind of thing. And companies have just been poking and prodding to see what they can get away with. And every time they get away with it, they get to poke a little bit farther and see if they can get away with a little bit more. You know, so until we put a stop to this, it's only going to get worse. And I think that Stop Killing Games, again, like I said, it's about more than games. And if we can put in legislation that does something as simple as stopping, you know, these companies from arbitrarily taking away your purchases for games, then that could apply to a lot of other things too. And in general, like I said, be just better for consumers as a whole. You know, and the whole reason why this is in the EU is just because they have this, you know, petition initiative system. And like, yeah, you might be thinking like, oh, well, I live in America, I live in Australia or whatever. You know, this doesn't apply to me. But like, that's the thing. The EU is such a huge market, you know, that you can't really ignore it if you're a global company. You know, it's the same reason why Apple finally changed over to USB-C. Do you think they would have done that on their own? I've seen some Apple fanboys try to make that argument, and yeah, no, it's a flawed argument at best. It's pretty obvious that the only reason Apple actually swapped over to USB-C is because the EU finally enforced it, and so if they were having to make an EU iPhone that used USB-C, well then they might as well make all the iPhones USB-C, you know? So like that's the kind of things that legislation in the European Union can kind of trickle down and affect everyone else as well. You know, because it's such a huge market. Like if a company has to make an end of life build in order to make it possible to keep playing it in the EU, there's no reason why that build can't also be made available elsewhere. You know, there was a time when I think it was China legislated loot boxes so that they had to at least display publicly the percentage chances of the actual rewards that you can get out of those loot boxes. And so as a result, that meant that now everybody knew what the percentages that you could get out of those loot boxes are. So like just having legislation in one country or territory, that can affect everyone else in the world, even if you live somewhere where that legislation doesn't directly apply to you. You know, so like this can be a great thing for everybody, no matter where you live. So like I said, even though I know my audience is small, I still think that it is important that I at least, you know, I do my part to try and get the word out there. I think it's important that as many people know about this as possible. And by all means, you know, don't even bother spreading this video. Spread Ross's video. You know, like it's not like I don't care how many views this video gets. All I care is spreading the word of Ross and his initiative, because he's really the spearhead of all this. And I think it's important that we get his words out there, because this really is a good thing for everybody. And I think you're insane to be against, you know, the idea of basic video game preservation, even if it is for live service games, even if it's for live service games that you hate, those games still deserve to be preserved. You know, like just because you don't like a game doesn't mean that it deserves to be thrown in the fire forever. You know, like how many times do we have to go through this with like Doctor Who episodes that have been lost to time, so that now it's actually impossible to watch all of Doctor Who because there are episodes that were just taped over in like the 1970s because the BBC didn't think it was important to preserve those episodes for future generations. How many movies from like the 30s and 40s were basically just taped over or thrown away because they couldn't afford the storage space to put the film reel somewhere? You know, like, how much art has been lost to time in wars and all of these other terrible things. Like, we learn this lesson over and over again, that it's important to preserve art. Why do we have to do this all over again for video games? It really shouldn't be this complicated. But yeah, I guess that'll do it for today. Thank you all for watching. I'll try to get out some regular content after this. See y'all later.